Uh, It's my pleasure to introduce the Shadow Opposition Spokesperson for Education. Unfortunately, due to a very congested schedule, he couldn't be here today. But as preempted, he has very graciously done a pre-recording for us, which I'll introduce shortly. Up until now, what we've done, obviously, is after the person has spoken, we've had a Q&A session. That's not going to be exactly possible. However, we would like you all to use Slido, both in the room and online. Use Slido to reflect upon what the Senator is about to say, and offer your observations, and then also use the upvoting button to upvote stuff that you've seen. At the end of his speech, I'm going to invite Professor Saggar back just to give his own initial reflections. I think that'll be a very good overview for us all, and it'll also give you time to reflect and put your own comments online. And then I'll come back and mediate that. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is Senator Duniam. Jono is a Liberal Senator for Tasmania, originally hailing from the northwest of Australia's island state. He is the new Federal Shadow Minister for Education and Early Learning, having been appointed to the role just over 3 months ago following the May election. Although he is only in his early 40s, Jono has a long and extensive history in political and public policymaking roles. Many of you will probably remember him from his role, for instance, in the previous term of Parliament as the Federal Shadow Environment Minister, when he was prominent in many key national debates. Prior to that, Jono was an Assistant Minister for Fisheries and Forestry, Regional Development and Industry Development, respectively. Jono was first elected to the Senate in 2016, and after that came a number of years serving, as the Deputy Chief of Staff to the former Tasmanian Premier, Will Hodgman. In respect of education, he's already laid down a number of key markers publicly, saying that he's keen to work closely with whoever he can, including the government, in the name of substantially improving outcomes for current and future cohorts of students. And it's a little bit of commentary here for me. Bipartisanship, as we know, is essential for higher education equity. Unfortunately, Jono can't be with us in person today, but he has recorded a video speech for us, so I ask you all to turn your attention to the video screens and to welcome Senator Duniam.
It sounds like at least a part of what you've just read out was probably shamelessly written by my office. So I'd like to thank you very much for the very kind introduction, Tim. And to all of you for allowing me to be a part of this symposium and for your dedication and your hard work in encouraging and fostering improvements in educational opportunities and outcomes right across our country. I'm honoured that you've asked me to speak with you here today, but I'd also like to say that I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person. A couple of last-minute changes to my calendar made it physically impossible for me to be with you. However, I'll certainly be with you in spirit throughout the entire event. And the main reason that I say this is that there are very few objectives that are more important or indeed more relevant to the national interest than the key ones on which you're focused as part of your agenda at this symposium. It's an excellent thing that you're canvassing how, amid turbulent and challenging times for the higher education sector, both here and of course abroad, to provide the best possible education to students, as well as trying to identify the best current and future means of securing that outcome for everyone. Importantly, for everyone regardless of considerations like race, like gender, disability, socioeconomic status, or postcode. The discussions and outcomes at events like this one are extremely valuable to people in positions like mine, members of Parliament too. And I'm extremely grateful to you, and particularly to those of you who have played key roles in organising this event and bringing everyone together. By definition, education is absolutely integral to guiding and transforming the lives of all, and the future, of course, of our nation. Students who receive a high-quality education also inevitably become fundamentally important contributors to strengthening and advancing the interests, prosperity, and, of course, the decency of our nation as a whole. They're also equipped with the essential skills to navigate life's challenges, from the most basic to the most complex, things we all know as people grow up they need to deal with. And to apply that more specifically to the symposium's focus, if we provide increased opportunities for students from disadvantaged and underprivileged backgrounds, then that isn't just a matter of fairness. it's the very least we in Parliament, leaders in our community, decision makers, should be providing. In my many recent meetings with Vice-Chancellors and other leaders from academic institutions, I've been especially struck by how many of those leaders readily recite stats to me about the number of first-in-family students they've attracted to their campuses. They've also strongly reinforced to me how the very attendance of those students at university typically provides great inspiration within each of those students' circles and networks. In almost all of those cases, they inevitably incentivise even more members of their own family and their local communities to follow in their lead as well. In short, when more Australians succeed in higher education, especially when that education is high quality, then there are multiple and profound benefits to the nation as a whole. Among many other positive spin-offs from that we acquire, not only a more skilled and innovative workforce, but also a more informed populace as well. And that's something our country can only benefit from. And if we distill that down to an individual level, of course, the experience of university education and the attainment of a tertiary qualification typically lead to increased job opportunities and, importantly, earning potential, as well as enhanced personal well-being, confidence, and security more generally. We should never lose sight of how important all of those things are to the individual and to the community, nor to be a little more negative, though, of how much work remains to be done to help fulfil them. In that context, I've been pleased that the issue of equity has been something that's been raised regularly in the many meetings that I've had recently with higher education stakeholders. And I've also been equally impressed by some of the unique and locally tailored strategies that are being implemented by individual universities to attract, to retain, and to boost student numbers from traditionally disadvantaged cohorts. I have to say that I'm getting lots of different pieces of evidence, many messages and suggestions from a range of different stakeholders across the country about exactly how we can best achieve such objectives, which in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, of course. Across society, there's a general consensus that everyone deserves a fair opportunity to succeed educationally, regardless of their background. And I think that's something all of us in the symposium and more broadly would agree with. In the political arena, there's multi-partisan agreement on that as well. And we've certainly moved a long way from the years and decades when there was a very narrow and stereotypical student demographic on Australian campuses. But I'm already learning, after only 3 months as Federal Shadow Education Minister, that there's quite a variety of ideas about how that goal is best achieved. Largely, that's been because ambition is one thing, but its translation into genuine, practical outcomes is very much another thing. For my part, and as many of you have probably learned by now or heard, I take the view in a political sense that bipartisanship on many key issues between the two major political parties is critical, as well as it being very much long overdue. Generally speaking, and again, I think this is something that you will agree with, education is far too important to be used relentlessly and remorselessly as a political football. And I want to take this opportunity to make, again, abundantly clear, I'm committed to working with the government to achieve real outcomes for students. This is no blank cheque, but a recognition that the approach taken over the past 20 years has not delivered what students, and indeed our country as a whole, has needed. And I want to take this opportunity to thank the Minister, Jason Clare, for his commitment and willingness to take a constructive and bipartisan approach to turning things around. It's something we discuss at our regular coffee catch-ups at Aussies in Parliament House. It's something you don't hear much about, a minister and his shadow minister catching up like this to talk about things and getting them right. We're both committed, we're both serious about getting this right. Often there's very little to be learnt or to be served from trading blows across the aisle over each and every issue, and then retreating to our respective political corners in forms too bruised and battered to attempt to pursue potentially sensible reforms any time in the near future. To that end, I'm content at this point to give the government the benefit of the doubt on their rollout of the Managed Growth Funding Scheme and how they intend to make it work in a practical sense. As you'd all know, the government has said that they will provide tens of thousands of new student places at universities, including specifically in the name of raising access for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. And I think that is, as we'd all agree, a very noble cause. And many people throughout the education sector who so far have provided me with feedback about this are generally reasonably positive about where that process stands at this point in time. Needs-based funding, similarly, is met with cautious optimism, and it's something we all need to be optimistic about. However, as the centre knows best of all, universities should not be going it alone in testing and trialling interventions when your work has established what works and why. And the purpose of the centre's establishment, supported by the Coalition, was to ensure that best practice could be adopted readily to shift the dial, not just for the enrolment of students from equity cohorts, but importantly for the thing we should be measuring, success. We obviously have a number of concerns about how HEPPP and the NIAA funding will roll out into needs-based funding. Indeed, needs-based funding adopted in schools under the Gonski model has yet to deliver its promised results. As the government embarks on adopting needs-based funding in higher education, especially if it's fundamentally being developed at arm's length by the ATEC, we should all seek assurances about what elements of a needs-based funding model will work in universities. Whether this latest attempt works or not remains to be seen, and of course we all hope that these pieces of work are successful. However, I do want to applaud all those from successive governments of both main political persuasions who have at least tried to improve access and to reduce the various barriers, including the many complex and fragmented processes to university entry. Views are more diverse and wide-ranging about the implementation of the Accord recommendations and the establishment of the ATEC, and exactly how the latter, of course, will play its role in setting directions and what role it may or may not have in regulating changes. That includes how it will be structured, how it'll be configured, and how it'll be staffed in its final form. Some of that evidence coming out or information coming out in a Senate inquiry underway as we speak. More importantly, it also includes what its philosophies as an organisation will be. I obviously intend to monitor the implementation of this very closely, including the government's stated commitment, of course in respect of equity outcomes, to the direction of more resources away from the nation's biggest universities and especially to regional campuses in acknowledgement of their higher barriers, their higher costs, and of course the contributions that are made. But all of that said, such measures and schemes are of course by no means the only avenues for politicians, elected representatives to do more in this field. It's also not to say that there haven't been a number of frustrations and, more to the point, some serious frustrations with the government's approaches to higher education funding, to higher education policy, and of course the legislation that goes with it. I imagine that a number of you would share my frustration when I say that there's been much confusion and a distinct lack of direction, generally, in many areas related to university governance. There's also certainly not been enough recognition of the inextricable link that should exist between education and our national productivity. So central and essential is this ingredient to our nation's success. The fact that it hasn't been spoken about is something that defies belief in my view. There hasn't been anything like enough done to stamp out anti-Semitism on a number of campuses, and sadly, in fact, quite the reverse. I also don't think I've met a single higher education stakeholder yet who's completely content with either the current or proposed future funding of the sector. That is something, of course, that is a concern raised regularly. Particularly pointed questions also linger about how research and development in Australia should be better fostered and supported. And I obviously acknowledge the government is currently undertaking a formal examination of funding for Australian research and development. And this is just one of the many areas in which a collaborative approach in Parliament will yield results. It is yet another opportunity where we can, along with all of the issues I've just listed off, deploy a constructive approach, a bipartisan approach to overcome the issues to better benefit our country and the individuals within the system. It's already a no-brainer that we need to do far better as a country in how we organise, how we collaborate on and commercialise our research, including from enhanced relationships between universities and businesses, and including from encouraging more Australians and a wider cross-section of them to undertake postgraduate study. From my perspective though, I'm very firmly of the view that we need to embrace a more holistic approach to education policy overall, including in relation to equity and equality. As my coalition predecessor in this portfolio of education and early learning, Sarah Henderson, said to you at this event just last year, we are concerned at the moment about many aspects of schooling in Australia, and undoubtedly we need to build more preparedness in our students if they are to successfully pursue further study, including by inserting more foundational educational elements back into our teaching. They are the fundamental precursors, in our view, to helping increase university enrolment and retention numbers. I'd add that we also need to more effectively think about and act upon the fact that opportunity and better access to a quality education doesn't merely begin at the car park or the front door of an admin building or indeed a lecture hall of a university. We simply must improve our education system and our educational outcomes across the board from beginning to end. The entire landscape is something that you cannot dissect one part from another and focus on one element to the exclusion of another. It is all interlinked. Inevitably, people from all backgrounds will have a far better formative experience in life if we genuinely enhance and strengthen the pipelines from early education to school, let alone then to the tertiary level as well. Yet we haven't satisfactorily respected, let alone realised, that goal for a long time. Our governments, over time, from all sides of politics, from federal, state and territory levels also, have been routinely spending more time and more money in recent years, and indeed the results have, of course, not matched the increased spending and effort that's gone in. And that is something, a statement I make, an observation I make in an overall sense. But if we break that data down even further and look at the various other indicators, the picture becomes even more disconcerting and disheartening. In fact, this might be a good moment to reflect on just a few many important comparative indicators, not least because these indicators reflect that no matter what interventions we've made over the past 2 decades, the past 20 years, we continue to see disadvantage cascading through our education systems, right from our youngest learners all the way through. And where we have expected to see green shoots, they're simply not emerging in the way we want them to. Yeah, and I should make the point, in no place is this more pronounced than in my own home state of Tasmania. The 2024 Australian Early Development Census showed that 22% of Australian children overall begin school with developmental vulnerability, but that number is as high as a third of our number, 33%, in our country's most disadvantaged communities. According to the latest PISA and NAPLAN data, by Year 9, students from low socioeconomic status backgrounds are around a whole 3 to 4 years behind their high SES counterparts in each of the different areas, reading, writing and numeracy. And that is an alarming statistic and a cause for alarm amongst decision makers. This is why I think it's important for us to band together, down weapons and come up with solutions in partnership with people like you who know a thing or two about how to fix these problems. The Victorian Education Union has calculated that among Year 5 students in their state, the achievement gap in reading equates to over 2.5 years of learning and about 2 years in writing and numeracy. By Year 9, gaps swell to roughly 4 years in reading and numeracy, and 4.5 years in writing. Secondary school completion rates also reflect a wide SES divide. As a part of that, 40% of young people from the lowest SES backgrounds across Australia do not complete Year 12. And by 2021, 68% of Indigenous Australians have completed their Year 12 or equivalent, compared to 91% of their non-Indigenous counterparts. In other words, a gap of 23 percentage points. In turn, roughly 66% of students from the highest SES quintile enter university, compared to just 25% from the lowest SES quintile. I can imagine that many of you in attendance today are familiar with the issues paper produced by the Public Education Foundation that estimated from 2009 to 2015, increasing educational inequality cost Australia roughly $20.3 billion, or roughly 1.2% of our GDP. Similarly, the Minderoo Foundation recently released a range of new data, among which it revealed that the economic burden of failing to identify development issues in young Australians had surged to almost 50%, to now stand at $22.3 billion annually. Frankly, all of these figures are disturbing, but again, it is a reason for us to act. It is compelling information that we need to act on. In addition, it would be completely remiss of me not to reflect on the point that there are many glaring and confronting weaknesses at even earlier points in the system, in our childcare, child safety and child protection systems too. Ones which, again, putting the politics aside, we do need to work on, and the government, with our support, is acting on. Of course, the nation's attention has been drawn very graphically to some of the most repugnant of all of those problems, as I've alluded to in recent months. It's just completely horrifying to most Australians, including to me as a father of 3 young men, that many people and our governments have failed to do enough to protect our youngest Australians from sexual predators. Even in settings like childcare centres, where their care and safety should be absolutely paramount. Overall, what all of those figures and all of those facts are saying is that we need to do things differently and indeed better. There's much reason, and indeed there's much justification, of course, for change. For the Federal Coalition's part, the opposition's part, and as our leader Susan Lee has enunciated very clearly, we're carefully and extensively reviewing all of our policies in these areas, and of course others. We want to listen to as many people as possible, and I've said at many addresses I've given at other fora previously, I'm no expert, I don't come to this portfolio with preconceived ideas, and we want to reflect the sensible views and advice in our policy positions, and we want to take the time, especially in the wake of a sizable election defeat in May of this year, to get our work right and to offer the best policies possible. And I hope for our benefit, and far more importantly for the good of the current and future generations of students, that we will be able to rely and draw upon your advice and your wholehearted commitment to high quality educational outcomes as part of that process. Of course, if you want to get in contact with me directly about any or all of the issues that I've talked about here today, then I'd be very, very happy to hear from you. As I say, I am only as good as the advice I'm receiving from those people who know what they're talking about. And the best place to start is, of course, sending me an email. I'm sure you can all find my email address. But I'm serious about genuine, effective, productive and meaningful reform. And I'd be delighted to hear from anyone with the same aims in mind. In the meantime, I very sincerely thank you for allowing me to be a part of the symposium today, even from a couple of thousand kilometres away. I wish you all the very best in your deliberations, your conversations and conferring throughout the next 2 days, and I wish you a very good outcome, and I look forward to seeing the outcomes and meeting with many of you directly in the weeks, months and years ahead. All the best, and thank you very much.
Thank you. And just before I call on Professor Saggar to respond, just a reminder to everybody, including those that may have come in a bit late, please use Slido to make your own reflections on what the Senator's just said. It's the polls button, not the Q&A button, because of course there are no Q&A. So click on the polls, please do put your own comments in. Professor Saggar?
So thank you, Tim. So this is always a bit contrived when you've got a recorded speaker, and obviously we can't have a debate, so we're going to obviously make the best of limited circumstances. Excuse me. So in the spirit of that, Tim asked me if I could sort of come up with some initial responses. You're very welcome to boo and disagree and sort of drag me off this stage. More than welcome. Maybe not. Give me a few minutes to start with at least. But I'm going to sort of comment about, make three or four overarching points in response to what I heard. I hadn't come across this recording before, and in fact, I've not met John before, so I hope to look forward to meeting him. And then I'll make a couple of sort of points at the end, just sort of telegraph points in terms of what I thought was a good thing or a bad thing. Look, just to start with, obviously I welcome the Shadow Minister to the portfolio, but he did strike me as an extraordinary moderniser. Just the language that he used, the style. I mean, I might even go as far as describing him as a technocrat. I don't know him, it's just my instinct listening to this. It's very refreshing. The exact words you heard towards the end, I wrote them down, was he wants to do things differently and better. So that looks like an open invitation. It's a good thing to hear to start with. Second of all, you clearly heard him talk about the value of education in sort of different dynamic ways. And he talked about the value of education to the individuals concerned, the value of education to others in society, and he talked endlessly. I think there were 4 references to the Australian fairness or fair go idiom. The quantification had to do with, I think, Mindrew and others coming up with amounts of around 20 to 15 billion that have been lost over different time frames. These are interesting ways of looking at how we are educating our young people and our population in Australia and the missed opportunities. It's clearly leaning into and has a concern about where we are as a society, particularly in terms of our economic heft. And again, that's a good thing in terms of those who are sort of responding to reform. But I think it's a third point that struck me above all else. I think this Shadow Minister, again, I don't know, but I'm imagining, is interested in bipartisanship. Those of you who were around last May at our initial policy symposium may recall the keynote from Omar Khan from the UK. And Omar made the following point, and I sort of summarise, I think, very authentically. He said, what work centres, now I'm talking about ACSES, but also a lot of your work, which is evidence-led. It's about trying to follow the evidence and be guided by these things. But a what works approach really only prospers when there's bipartisanship, is what Omar said. If you have first-order disputes about the goals that you're trying to achieve through education, either the compulsory system or the tertiary system, then you're going to struggle in terms of assembling the evidence, interpreting it, never mind following it. So this is, I think, different in that sense. There's importance to building bipartisanship if we're being serious about taking an evidence-led approach to better equity outcomes. But while I'm at it, there's also a point about bipartisanship in terms of guiding long-term strategy in higher education, and particularly I think about the forthcoming debates in Parliament about the detail of the legislation that will be underpinning ATEC. It'll be very interesting to see whether the particular amendments are put down from the opposition that might either constrain or liberate ATEC. I've no way of predicting, but it'll be interesting to look at the extent to which the opposition sees long-term reform guided by a commission that is going to have an arm's-length relationship with day-to-day higher education politics. I think that's a good thing. That's my own personal view. But what matters is his view and that of the opposition and the opposition leader. So those are a few sort of overarching comments. Can I, while I've got the platform, just quickly have a couple of telegraph points? I think he was essentially saying there was a missed opportunity in terms of education having a place at the recent Economic Productivity Roundtable. Yes, I entirely agree with him on this point. I think I wrote something in the Times Hire a couple of weeks ago. It's amazing that we have senior business leaders, economists, and all sorts of experts around the table, and the university sector simply is not present in the way you would expect it to be in any other comparable industrial democracy. It's extraordinary that we've gone through that process, just looking at what universities can contribute. And related to that, of course, Duniam was talking about his desire to improve the way in which we take research and development and sort of catapult it into the missing commercialization space. We can do so much more. I couldn't agree more with him, but again, the detail matters. And I think the last thing is really quite important. Here is a shadow minister. I repeat, I don't know him. I'm just responding to the words that were on that screen. But he clearly did signal to us that he felt that the die was cast early on in early years education, that in a sense we were dealing with these problems far too downstream, and we need to be quite serious about all these problems that are taking place early on. Again, a good analysis, a good observation, but a lot depends upon what should be done in response to that. Tim, if that's okay, that's just off the cuff. I hope it will sort of stimulate thoughts. Please, audience, feel free to agree, disagree, and sort of jump in with your own comments. Do you want me there or down? Okay.
Thank you very much, Shamit. And some comments coming in already. Again, encourage you to keep posting. There is a lot of, as Shamit noted, there's a lot of observation about the bipartisanship, and that is very good to see. Those of you that were here last year at the same symposium would have heard Senator Sarah Henderson speak. I won't make any commentary about what she said. I would just observe that that is markedly different in both tone and content. And I think in terms of bipartisanship, we would be very happy to see this. And on that, there is the observation. It's lovely to hear the bipartisanship, but I wonder whether he can last until the next time we have an LNP government. Well, let's hope he does, if we consider the alternatives that are not around bipartisanship. There is a question in there which, even though it can't be answered because the senator is not here, it is a question about what his view is on JRG. I think it's fair to say that this is a question that we pose to him regularly and often, and it'll be very interesting to see his response on that. Notwithstanding the bipartisanship, I did myself sense a couple of codes in there. He referred to ATEC and he used the word philosophies. I think that is an indication from him that they will be looking very closely at ATEC, and they will be looking very closely at any sense that ATEC is not evidence-driven but ideologically driven. Again, I make no commentary on that. I just observe that I think that will be a point of interest for the government, for the opposition. Again, a lot of comments coming in about bipartisanship, and as the Program Director of Trials and Evaluation, I can't miss this opportunity, again in the comments that picked up on the Senator's observations about we need evidence, and we need evidence that these initiatives and activities and programs equity-based are going to work. On that, I think there was an excellent commentary yesterday around the people that were here for the finance discussion around the NBF, and there were observations that we're still trying, the universities themselves are still trying to work out, and there are still some concerns about how the NBF will actually play out. I think higher education equity practitioners would rightly be concerned if the money flowing from the NBF is going into consolidated revenue and there's no impetus on them actually to evaluate what works. And I think what happened today in this speech was it's a reminder that the NBF is a significant pool of money, and just as it can be given, it can be taken away by a future government. We'd be mad not to evaluate it ourselves. We'd be mad not to put ourselves in a position to demonstrate through evidence what is working in higher education equity to protect that revenue. Just scrolling through. I hope I haven't missed anything. The Shadow Minister raises good points regarding ATEC and funding design such as the NBF. What does he propose to improve these two important policy reforms? I think as ATEC's entering legislation shortly, isn't it? And I think we'll see some very heated debates, some very interesting debates around that. I also noted that the Senator used the expression downing weapons. Again, it's a nice way of talking about bipartisanship, but also a reminder that those weapons can just as equally be taken up if they feel that they're not being listened to. Not surprisingly, the Senator tied education to national productivity. Again, this is an area of bipartisanship that we see frequently. It's an area that both sides of the political divide will agree on. And I also noted myself that he made a specific reference about moving, again, I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, this is what I heard, that he said, looking to shift resources away from the large universities and towards regional universities. Even if I haven't got that exactly correct in the wording, it is a reminder that regional universities are an area of strong bipartisanship as well. The Minister argued that the Universities Accord was intended to set medium long-term directions to the sector. The promise of bipartisanship would seem to offer an opportunity for this. Let's hope so. Okay, I feel like I'm padding desperately for the last 3 minutes, and unfortunately, unlike Ian, I do not have any magic tricks, and I have very poor jokes. So I might invite Ian up, and I'm sure he'll be able to offer his own reflections and conclusions, and then he can pass over to the final section, if that's okay with you, Ian. Thank you.
I would like to thank again the Senator and Shadow Minister for sharing his approach to higher education policy and equity, and also my colleague Tim Pitman for coordinating the response to the Shadow Minister's speech. Now we are going to switch gears a little bit and move to our international keynote for this morning.